NativeScript with Vue. Perhaps just a little question or two. People working with Vue lately? All right, with NativeScript? Thank you. Well, the idea for today is this one. I thought about 10 topics, and at the end, 2 other ones, code sharing and collaboration with the project, have been added. But the idea is to talk about the general purpose of NativeScript and NativeScript with Vue, and then talk a short moment about installation. What can we tell about the build process, the debugging experience, development process, a look at the layouts. There are several layouts. How do we work with UI elements here? How do we access the file system, the hardware, and perhaps the best feature of NativeScript? How do we talk to the native APIs of both iOS and Android? So let's go with idea number 0 is about myself. My background in formal education is in economics and business, but for 10 years, more or less, I've been doing development, mobile, .NET, web, and I am the founder of a company, Openbox Software, and I also do at IS Business School here in Lisbon some work of executive coaching. So what is the idea of NativeScript? Perhaps one of the points important that you are in the world of JavaScript, not HTML but XML, very similar, CSS. If the work, our work is in this world, we are familiar with these technologies. Another very important idea is that we will build applications that use the native components, not some web view that is similar to the native, but not really the native ones. When we use a button, it is an iOS button on an iOS device and an Android button in an Android device. The performance is near native, not pure native, and perhaps one of the most important also, we have full access to the underlying APIs. If we need to talk to some API of the native system, we can. It's open source, but is supported by Progress. It's a considerable large company, so some comfort we can take from here. Well, how do we install, make the installation? The reference is this page here. Notice not only nativescript.org, but nativescript.vue.org, a special page for the projects of both technologies. And here, get started, installation. And more than installation, templates. Now, this first decision, we have to pre-bundle templates to start our first application. It is a very important decision because those who know Vue or have heard of it more or less, perhaps know that a very important concept is what is called single file components. A component where only in one file, the same file, we put the templates, we put the logic, the JavaScript business logic, and we put the style, the CSS styling. I think, and most of the Vue community think, that is one of the best features of this technology, of this framework. So this template allows to use the single file components, and this doesn't allow. So it's a major difference between the two. We are going to use here the first one, to use the single file components, and we will show some code. So we have to install the Vue CLI. This is important, and some of the documentation is a little bit misleading. Vue CLI has now two versions. The last one, version number 3, is here. But the template uses version number 2, the later one. And to access that version, we need another project, CLI init, to use the init command. That is a command of the 0.2 version. Of course, I'm not here describing the process of installing all the Android SDKs, all the Xcode and libraries of iOS, and the NativeScript itself. I'm thinking that all of that is already installed. It may take a few hours of work if you don't have it in your machine, but now I have all of that and want to build a NativeScript Vue project. I will install the Vue specific part, let's say. Now you have a Vue init command, use the template, and use a name for the project. Go to that directory, npm install to download all the packages, and a small command, npm run, to build the project and make a deployment in or a device or a simulator, emulator. So if you go to all these steps, what will you see? We'll see this project here. So this project, a Hello World project. Not the main part is the source folder, and now the point of entry of this application will be this file main.js. This is for those of you who have worked with Vue, is a Vue application 100% or near. We import the Vue package. We import the router to do the navigation between pages. We import the store, is the Vuex model to do the management of the state of application. Some styles, and here the famous Vue instance, and the start of the application. If one have developed some web Vue projects and see this is exactly the same, feels very comfortable with it. Now, the router will enter in action, and how do you know the first screen of the application? Well, the first screen is here, home. Will be the first screen to appear when the application is launched. Afterwards, we have several. We have a Vue router configuration with several paths, and we'll navigate between the several screens. I will show you in a moment more detail about this. Then we have the home view, and this is a single file application, but this one only with the templates. This is the XML, very similar to our more traditional HTML, and have here the elements: a page, an action bar, a stack layout. All of these we'll talk about a little bit later. So this one is a little bit more interesting. We have the three sections we talked about earlier: the template, here, the logic, the script, we have a data and the style, all in one file. And the application is structured in that way, the counter, etc. I will not do here the bundling and the deployment, but I have some videos with this application, one at Android and another at iOS. Let's start by Android. So, what do we have here? The start, the home screen, a counter, hello world. We will not see the touches because, but this is the counter. Some logic here. Hello world, some logic. All these are native buttons, native components of Android, not web views, how we said. And iOS. iOS. This is an iPad, so smaller, larger screen, and the components of iOS. All right. So this was a Hello World application. We have a field of how to start an app. We install some packages. We do one or two command line commands, and with the template we can start very rapidly to build some technologies. So what about the build process? Here we haven't done the build, but about the build we have two main alternatives. The local build, I use local builds for these demos, but also Progress have a nice product offering cloud builds. So I don't have Android SDKs in my computer. I don't have Xcode or all the codes to build an iOS application. Well, I can, with a simple login, they have a free offering of 100 builds for a month. It is sufficient to test. Now, if you, after this, try to do, and I don't have the SDKs and all that, and I want to try the cloud builds. How can you do that with these templates? You have to do a little small trick, because when this command in the template is not expecting the cloud. No. This cloud, you have to add it. And this is perhaps a bug of the system, because a free customer, I suppose, don't have account ID or don't know the account ID, I don't know, and it complains, I don't have an account ID and I need an account ID. So if you put one or perhaps any, I don't know, in front of this, it will work. And this I will show you in a moment. Is more or less, I think, here at the end of the launch file. Right. So you would come here and do this little trick, and could have the cloud builds working. This is not very... What about debugging? Debugging, it has been a little bit of a fight by now in my personal experience. We have a command to debug, and we are given an URL to make the debugging at Chrome. What you will see? We will see the structure of your elements. That first screen, we saw a button with a counter label. We saw a button with Hello World. When you are here debugging, all the changes that you make here are almost instantly translated to the device or to the emulator. So this works really nice to make small changes to the interface and see what happens in the device. But what about breakpoints? Breakpoints and that developer experience that you like. So I have tried to get it working, but I couldn't. For now, the best in this architecture, the best that I can, is to have all the app.js with all the bundle of all the JavaScript of the application, do a prettify, and then we have more or less a good view of the methods. Can make a little search for this is a method of a component that we have here. In this case, what has happened? The documentation doesn't have the object configuration. We are past an event, but we don't know what are the different fields of the event object. And here we can put a breakpoint and inspect, and is useful. We don't see here the several components, but we have something more or less similar. So not that bad, really. What about the development experience? We have two concepts here. One is live sync. NativeScript takes a while to build and deploy at the first time, but afterwards is fairly fast, doing the rebuild necessary to show the changes. So live sync is okay, but a concept even better is hot reloads. With hot reload, we don't lose the states. If we have a variable with some value, when we are developing, that value we will maintain. The documentation, if you read the documentation, and they say hot reload works, but the experience is hot reload doesn't work for now. But it's a nice perspective to have a development cycle faster. Well, I think this is interesting. We have a UI. You have to build some UI, and we have 6 layouts that are given to us. An absolute layout when you specify the coordinates, a dock layout with left, top, bottom, right, a flexbox, more or less flexbox layout similar to the CSS framework, a grid, table-like layout. We have a stack, vertical or horizontal. You have a warp, also vertical or horizontal. So 6 very flexible layouts. I think it is a nice element of NativeScript, a NativeScript Vue. What about the use of the UI elements? This is a small part of the documentation, and the 2 concepts to retain, and the more important ones, are props and events. This is the way that a Vue component talks to the outer side, to the parent component. With props, the Vue component gets input from the parent. From the perspective, this is defined on the child component, and the parent defines, as we shall see, the values for these properties. And the events is the way that the child component uses to talk to the parents, to pass an information about something that has happened. We will see an example right now. I will talk about file system, hardware, and native API very shortly, but perhaps I will show first the final results. So, last video, iOS, the final demo. So we have a native, a switch. This is a switch to show the UI components, the UI development. This is the result. We will see the code right away. Now we are going to perhaps file system. I will try to write hi there, as you will see. I will not be able to do it. No there or something similar, but hi there, no. We will save this string in a file, and afterwards we'll read the file. There, not hi there, but the blame is this keyboard, iPad keyboard. So we'll save this in a file, we'll show you the code, and now read that file. Perhaps I think photos now. Yes, photos. How do we access the photo capability? Well, here it is. I will take a photo of magic mouse. Okay, use photo, and have here a component to show the image. And now, perhaps the most interesting, native API. Not very interesting, but you will see that it is relevant. So, how to access native APIs, how to access the file system, the behavior of UIs, and the photo. Native components, as you see, different from the other ones. Now, the file system. Hi there. At Android is more easier to do it. We will save a JSON for the JSON format of this text and read it afterwards using the device file system. So, take a photo of the mouse again, but now with an iPad in the same code. Okay. And finally, a difference in the native, because here we are differentiating according to the, here we are just formatting a date, but with a native Android API. All right. What about, very rapidly, the code for this? Not this one, but this one. Well, single file components are the most important concept here. So we have here, starting with UI switch. The concepts of props. This switch component has property named checked, which sets or gets the state, checked or not checked, and an event will alert the parent component that the value was updated. So in the business logic here, we can do, we set the first time value, the initial value. This is Vue syntax, a data object, or in this case a function, and the method, value updated, the event object, and an alert box with with this function afterwards. So this is one of the interesting aspects of native scripted Vue. This is all completely Vue, so very easy to come here and start coding. What about the file systems? So here we need an extra NativeScript model file system to access the file system, and the syntax is very straightforward. We just specify a file name, file name, and then with the model that we have imported, non-folders, documents, get file name. We format with JSON the text from the UI and just use this method, FileWrite method. And with these lines we use the file system, and here we read the same file. We get a reference to that file with file name and the same syntax as above, and then read text sync and show the variable to the UI. As you might notice, this is a Vue capability. We change the value of the variable, and automatically that value will show at UI, because we are using a property named Vue model, who does a double think between the UI and the variable. When the variable changes, the UI changes, and the reverse is also true. When the UI changes, the value of the variable is updated. What about photos? To use the camera, NativeScript model again, camera, a model to deal with the images, and then a small piece of syntax, very straightforward also. Camera requests permissions, take a picture, and then afterwards the picture was taken, we can associate the image to the UI. So with a very small amount of code, you do the same in iOS and in Android. Well, perhaps one of the most interesting is native. Imagine that we have some library, or we have some specific UI, specific API, Android or iOS, and want to use it. How to do? Native. So here, first of all, we are using the platform model, NativeScript platform model, and with that model we can differentiate between iOS and Android. This code will be called when we are in an iOS device, and this one where we are at Android. So what is this here? This is a native iOS component, nothing less. This is could be anything. So we are in a JavaScript world, but with all the native APIs. So NativeScript, I think we can say that, is always 100% with the platform. We don't have the problem, whoa, iOS 12, oh no, NativeScript will not. No, because everything is automatically translated from JavaScript to the native APIs. And this here, the formatted date that we saw earlier, is, well, a translation of the Java API to the JavaScript syntax. This is a native Android API. We are using the time class, this object, of the library of Android. And perhaps can use these kind of things is one of the great selling point of NativeScript. With Vue, we have all the easy of building the UIs, responsive UIs, very easy to update. But from NativeScript itself, we have all these possibilities. Oh, sorry. Sorry. So, no. File system, hardware, native API. In the future, and perhaps a small part of the present, one approach that is present is code sharing. Code sharing not between iOS and Android. That code sharing is already done. Code sharing between the web and the mobile. So we can have one project only, but in the single file component, when you saw one template, we would see two templates. One template for the web with HTML and one template for the mobile devices. That is code sharing. There is already a template to do that code sharing, but I was, I think, not able to use it, an error of some kind. It's a work in progress. Perhaps we can think that by now is a very good moment to collaborate with this open source project, because this author here, I think from Russia, has almost all the commits of the project, almost 500 and 400. And the second best contributor have 9 commits. So it's a one-man show. NativeScript Vue, not NativeScript itself. So one of the difficulties of this technology is it lacks people. It lacks scale. So perhaps it would be a good moment for anyone to collaborate and... Whoa, is the last one. So that's it. If you have questions...
How do you...
styling, sorry, I didn't mention it, but we use not all the CSS, but a large portion of CSS. So in this component here, I think perhaps Hello World. Let's check. Yes. So this is CSS that were styling the UI. Margin, color, so class selectors and selectors. We cannot use all CSS, but the most common one, yes.
What about the native components? Do you import them? Would you mind showing the native tab again?
The native tab.
You said...
Now there is an automatic translation between the JavaScript code and the native syntax. So all these are already in the NativeScript libraries. We have to do this. Is, according to the documentation and according to the experience, a little bit a trial and error until you can get it right. But there are some rules how to write a JavaScript code to deal with the native APIs. There are some rules documented, and then you only use those rules, and you mimic. In the end, you mimic the native syntax. In Java, you would write more or less, perhaps a capital letter here and there, but more or less equal.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, thanks for the talk.
You're welcome.
Do you have experience with other native libraries or frameworks? So, for example, I haven't myself experienced them myself, but so I've read about React Native and Flutter, and from what I have read is that given some large DOMs, React Native gets very sluggish, and Flutter performs very well. So where on this scale does NativeScript with Vue fit in?
Well, it largely depends on the language because not with Reactive, but with Flutter. Flutter, I think, is
Dart.
Dart. If you want to enter in the Dart world, not the dark world. But I don't have that much experience. I saw only a few tutorials and a few conferences. But perhaps, yes, one of the criteria to make a decision is your language of choice. If you want to keep in the JavaScript world, perhaps by now is one of the most promising technologies, I think.
Thank you. I have another one.
Okay.
So I have seen some promise-based handling. Do you know if NativeScript also supports the new async await syntax? Because I feel that it makes the code a lot more readable and error handling a lot easier and so on.
Well, I will not know because we have a build process and we put Babel and Babel takes care of everything. I don't really know if we don't use the build process. We have to use the build process without, because if we were using only Vue, we could use Vue without the build process. But with NativeScript, we don't. So I don't really know if we depend on the build process or you could use without it.
I see. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you. I don't know if you have used NativeScript with Angular, but if you do, did you see some performance changes using Vue instead of Angular because it has a simpler API?
No, I didn't use with Angular. I used some time ago Angular by itself, but not with NativeScript. No. My journey was being delighted with Vue, and then found out, oh, NativeScript with Vue. Let's try that. Well, thank you very much.
Further questions?
Yes. When you have to develop also for the web, what is usually your approach? Do you start with the web because you have?
By now, I have totally separate projects.
It's totally separate. You can't reuse anything.
No. You were not speaking of the code sharing approach, perhaps. The code sharing approach that we are talking.
I don't know how it is the state, because even for instance, there you have the platform model that is iOS. Can you have is web, or what is the approach for the code sharing?
No, when we spoke about code sharing, in the other slide. The idea, you have only one project, but no, I think you can't use, you can use the business logic to be the same and split the templates in two separate ones. One template for the web with HTML and one template for the mobile. But in the business logic, for the web component, you couldn't use this because you have, in the browser, you don't have the native components of the iOS or of the Android. So here you perhaps you would have to have another if I'm on a browser, do this. If I'm on an Android, do that. If I'm on an iOS, do this.
For instance, if you are working with service workers and local storage and progressive web apps that deal with a lot of the native thing. It's not native, but it's almost like that. You'd reuse a lot of things. And
see, I personally have done a lot of web work separately of all these, but yes, I think much of the JavaScript logic that you have to write, you can reuse it. That's the idea of the code sharing.
But separated projects, not.
No, the idea is to be able to have only one project. The idea is to make that possible. If it is the right approach for the specific project, we won't have to see. But I think the idea is appealing. Only one project and then separate the concerns.
Good, then.
Thank you.
Thank you.